Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Welcome to Why the Long Face, everybody. So I kind of didn't need my doctor to tell me this, but I do need to lose a bit of weight.
You need anybody who's come within a mile of you with a pair of working eyes.
Thank you. Aiming at a 5 to 7k.
10.
But I mean, 5 is hard enough ask, isn't it?
No, well, I lost 10 once.
Especially as the crucial thing is going to be to cut down the alcohol.
You need to lose 10. I can tell that from here, and there's a table between us. You're a
How much have you got to lose?
Same, but I'm not going to.
The same?
Yeah, I'm going to lose the same as you.
But you're morbidly obese.
I'm gross obese.
I'm just overweight.
Get this, so I'm gross obese, not morbidly obese.
Oh, right.
Morbidly obese means almost certain death. I'm gross obese.
That you need a hoist, basically. Yeah.
That's Henry VIII in his latter years, hoist to get on the horse obese. I'm gross obese.
Okay. All right. We're not as far away from morbid as you think.
But I'm still enjoying a Villa Maria. But listen, man, I'm going to be very supportive of your.
Thank you, but I have
because I don't want you to drink all the wine. We've only got half a bottle left.
And I have actually poured myself a glass, but that's what I'm going to stop at that.
Please do, because I've only had a couple down.
Because actually a glass or a small glass every day is better than no wine.
I don't believe all that.
It's a J-shaped curve.
But anyway, we're having I normally have a Savvy Blanc, and the doctor will have a Rioja or something red normally, but he's having some Villa Maria, and it's all right. It's okay, but not brilliant.
Yes, thank you, Oliver Turnbull, sommelier to no one. Yes, so what are we talking about tonight, boss?
Well, we're talking about manliness, and we're talking about depression in men. We had an episode, one of my favourite ones we've done so far, on depression in women, and we got good feedback about that. But there is
we did from some people,
and other people, just the usual, Paul, why do you hang around,
or just usual indifference? But anyway, it was not a bad episode, that.
Well, I enjoyed it, and so we thought we'd do one on male depression and touch on hidden depression as well, which often affects men, which is suffering in silence, I guess, having low-level symptoms but being able to carry on, functioning depression, it's often called. And we thought we would explore a couple of those issues from a male perspective, which we should be able to do, being men.
Yeah. So I think you hit the nail on the head with hidden, because we suspect, or this, I think increasingly the profession suspects, that these headline figures of prevalence of depression in men and women may not be indicative of the real level of suffering out there in men, because it's a kind of 2-to-1 ratio of lifetime risk, isn't it? Female to male. But there are increasingly a large number of researchers going, hey, hold on a minute. Men are not that great at talking about their emotions, and they're not that great at being in touch with them. So if you're going to do a community survey of depression symptoms, are men going to report them all? And are they going to have the typical ones that we have talked about?
So when you say not able to express them, are you saying that sometimes men can be restricted in the language used to express how you feel?
I think so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, just because they're less practiced at it. Because I think society's norms are such that men are not encouraged to talk about their emotions, women are.
And do you think that is society, or do you think there's some biological factor going on?
It could be. I suspect not. I suspect that men and women are equally capable of talking about their emotions. In fact, I know they are, in the right environment. I'm pretty sure that it's societal.
I had an encouraging thing that I heard from my son, who's 20, and he was talking openly about the struggles one of his friends had with anxiety, for example.
Right.
And they were talking at it as openly as when I was younger. You'd be as open talking about football or whatever. But I would never have had the vocabulary or the experience at 20 to be able to understand what anxiety was. Right. I don't think back when I was 20 in the mid-1980s. So whereas him, it seemed to come much more naturally. So
well, that's good.
I'm naturally optimistic.
It's encouraging.
Yeah.
It shows that the thing. Well, that I suppose suggests that it is it is an kind of old-fashioned, it's increasingly old-fashioned male stereotype that the man has to be strong and not express his emotions.
And yet I can still remember when I was brought up, I went to a fairly strict prep school in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
And I remember quite distinctly the teacher saying, stop looking so sad. What are you going to do? You're going to cry? Stop being a crybaby. When I was upset. And it sort of stays with you, I think. And you think, oh, okay, no, I don't want to be a crybaby. You're right. That sounds humiliating. So that was certainly going on when I was growing up. And I'm sort of hoping that it's less these days. But
Right, yeah. Because if you look at the sort of the literature on how men might express depression, irritability, really, and aggression is what I've read.
Is that sort of low-level hidden depression, or is that the sign of a proper?
I think if you then ask the right questions, you probably determine that they've got they tick all the boxes for major depression. But it's just that they don't necessarily express it. They don't say I'm feeling sad. I don't say I'm feeling down necessarily.
You might get this. Just leave me alone.
Yes.
Just leave me alone.
Yes, because they're trying to be strong.
Yeah.
Too busy trying to be strong. And the other one is I feel tired. So they might complain of the physical the physical symptoms of depression, I guess, more than the emotional. Can't concentrate, feeling tired, don't know what it is. Shoulders are a bit heavy.
It's funny, isn't it? Because actually there's something more comforting about feeling tired than there is about imagining that you're suffering from a mental illness. Even saying the phrase mental illness, it sounds a bit scary to me, maybe because I'm a bloke, but it's actually something that's quite scary to admit to.
Studies seem to suggest that men are less good at developing support networks.
About a year ago, someone I knew vaguely came out, as we call it, on Facebook. And he was a larger-than-life character, ex-army, very tough guy, muscles, tattoos, just what you'd expect from a sort of macho, but not in an unpleasant way at all. But he was a very masculine man, drank a lot, played a lot, liked chasing women, and he came out and said, "Everybody, I'd like to announce that last night I tried to take my own life." And the reason I did is because I've been suffering from depression. I've been denying it. And now I've got to this crisis stage. Thank goodness I was saved. And it's my opportunity to, tell the world my story. And it was very moving.
Wow.
And very positive. And guess what the reaction was from his friends on Facebook?
Positive,
of course,
overwhelmingly.
It was. Universally, overwhelmingly positive. I put a message in as well. I don't know this chap very well. I really, really liked him. And again, it was a shock. It was almost like, how could he? And this made me start to think about hidden depression and how men, particularly people who would be traditionally called masculine men, army guys, sports guys, feel even more than your average fella, that they have to hide it because they've got this persona to live up to. Yeah. And the fact that he thank God he was found and he wasn't able to take his own life. He found this new lease of life, and B, this desire to tell the world, if you like, about his vulnerability. And not only was he was just the same likeable guy as he was before, I had even more respect for him for doing this, as did his friends, both his friends that he'd met working in an office like he met me, and his army mates. It was really quite touching, the outpouring of affection for this man, and also the understanding, and the occasionally someone would say, "Hey," well, his name was, "I've been there."
Right.
And they encourage him to tell their story.
Yeah. Which is a brave thing to do, given that there's still a stigma attached to depression, but particularly, I think, in men.
Well,
and because they present later, don't they? They don't present depression if it doesn't sort of resolve itself within a month. Is likely to last for maybe 6 months, right? Before you come out of it. And that's assuming that you are not exposed to the same stresses that led to the depression in the first place.
Right.
Or relationship difficulties, or whatever it was, the background of life difficulties that were there when the depression came along. So
let me just be clear about what you're saying. So if you're saying you're struggling with a relationship or a problem with your boss at work or whatever, and that
Or with men, often a classic one with men as well as money worries.
Right, and they lead you into
Huge.
depression. You're saying even if the stressor is removed, there's still a period where the brain has to, let's say, recover.
I think so. You know, whatever treatment you end up with, which might be medication, might be an antidepressant, or it might be talking therapy, or a combination of both. Why not curtail your suffering? Because we've got those treatments available.
Yeah, and as soon as possible.
Depression can deepen. It can get worse if you just ignore it. If you ignore the depression and or ignore the circumstances that led to it and don't correct those, then something that was perhaps a mild depression becomes more severe. Other symptoms develop, and we've talked about one serious complication of ignoring depression, which is a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I think there must be more depression than the official statistics suggest, or it's just that men. But I also think men probably present later or don't present at all, and that could well be part of the reason why men make up most of the suicide statistics.
Yeah.
75%.
That's what really worries me,
Suicides.
the hidden nature of it, okay?
Yeah.
It almost seems like there's an additional... So if you're suffering from depression and you come out and you're starting to get treatment, that's a release already, I would imagine. But when it's hidden, it's like a double whammy. One, you're suffering, and two, the energy you're expending in actually hiding it from the world, because you have to function and you have to pretend, if you like, lie to a certain extent, so that people think you're okay. It's almost like double the effort for the poor sufferer.
I'm also thinking damage to relationships the longer the depression goes on. If you're not disclosing it.
Yeah.
If you're keeping that hidden from your partner, for example, your wife, spouse, that can lead to the breakdown in that relationship if you're not careful.
And then that's another thing to cope with.
Yeah.
And it feeds on. Can I just, at this point, it might not be timely to do so, but it seems reasonable to do so. There might. What I'm hoping is that there might be someone listening to this randomly, thinking, I'm wondering whether this is me. I haven't been happy for a while. I haven't been getting as much pleasure as I have out of stuff for a while, but I don't think I'm depressed. I don't feel that I could go to a psychiatrist in order to get diagnosed as a mental illness.
Yeah.
But what we're saying is,
I don't feel sad. I'm not indulging in that.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly. I don't want to moan, and I don't want to moan. I don't want to be a problem. I'm just feeling flat. What would you advise as a professional clinician as the kind of symptoms that someone might have this hidden low-level depression, which again could get worse, but would get better so much quicker with an intervention now? What are the sort of symptoms that someone, I'm just imagining a guy, and of course it could be a woman, listening to this going, well, hang on.
You mean the kind of
Exactly
early
right.
warning signs?
Exactly.
So you might be struggling a bit to sleep at night. Whatever your hobbies are, they're tailing off a bit, and you notice that you're not quite so interested in meeting up with your mates and all those social things. You'd rather spend time on your own.
What about irritability? Is that...
Irritability
sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? You're a bit grumpy. I mean, that doesn't mean you're depressed, does it? But can it be
it can be
a sign?
As we said before, I think just becoming increasingly irritable could be part of it. Yeah. We find you losing your temper easily.
What about drinking more or other substance abuse?
Yeah. I suppose what I was trying to get at there will still be some core symptoms, like you're not getting as much pleasure from things as you used to. But yeah, I think that men are more likely than women to end up with dependence on alcohol or drugs. That's just a fact. And I think a good proportion of those men, the route into that problem was depression.
I read something actually earlier today on a website called Exploring Your Mind, and it said all those things that you've mentioned. It also said something about social situations.
Right.
And people with low-level or hidden insidious depression sometimes start to feel less comfortable in social situations. They feel a little bit more on edge. They feel the conversations are pointless, small talky. They can't really get much pleasure out of them, but they're not really interested in interacting socially as well.
Less interested. Yeah. And maybe they're lacking in confidence, which means they feel they've got less to contribute. That as well, which is probably why they're feeling edgier.
Do you think that, let's call it hidden depression? I know it's not a real thing, but it's something that we're talking about here as a symptom of someone who may be heading towards something more serious. Do you consider it? When do you consider something a clinical illness? And is it sometimes unhelpful to try and categorise depression? And really, the most sensible thing to do is categorise it as a set of symptoms with a varying amount of severity, which is on a spectrum, if you like. And when the severity of those symptoms becomes so bad that it affects daily functioning, daily life, or it persists or it dominates people's thinking, that's when you should start thinking in terms of a clinical illness.
Well, that's when we start to call it a disorder, I guess. Yes, an illness or depressive, or clinical depression or major depression or depressive illness is when it's affecting your functioning. Yeah, but I suppose you don't want to wait until the point where you literally can't go into work anymore to seek help.
Right.
So it's that period when you are really struggling to maintain the same level of performance, if that makes sense. And you get home at the end of the day, you're completely exhausted and you kind of collapse, and you haven't got any energy left for, I don't know, talking to your partner or your kids. Or,
I think a really useful one is taking less pleasure in things, because people love playing with their kids, people love following their football team, people love having a laugh with their spouse and their mates. It's quite a distinct difference from normality when you think, I can't be bothered to see anyone, I just want to stay alone, I don't even watching the telly or doing very little. And it can creep up gradually. So if you find that it's tailing off, have a think about why that might be. What would you do first? I mean, would you get professional involvement if someone's listening to this and thinking, actually, some of these symptoms, I mean, I don't feel there's no point in going on, I haven't got that far, but I am taking less interest in the magazines I used to read, the newspapers I used to read. I'm feeling flat and exhausted in the evenings and withdrawing a little bit socially. Is that the time to seek medical help?
I don't see why not. I think if you've got a good relationship with your GP, I would have a chat with your GP, but I suppose a step before that might be a friend you can trust, or your partner or a family member who knows you well. Why not mention it and just changing your life a bit, rather than just ploughing on and ignoring what your mind is telling you, mind and body. Your pleasure system's shutting down a little bit, and you haven't got as much energy. That's telling you something. That's telling you that your brain is exhausted. Depression is something that men need to get better at talking about and seeking help for, because the longer you leave it, the more you run the risk of that depression deepening. We've mentioned suicide, we mentioned harm to relationships, we mentioned unnecessary suffering. The more severe depression gets, and the longer it goes on for, that then increases the risk of relapse in the future.
So there's almost a case of you owe it to yourself to protect yourself if you're starting to feel the early signs, because that will hold you in better stead later.
The more severe your depression gets, the more likely it is to recur.
It's a little bit like looking after any one of your organs. If you're like eating too much, drinking too much, and you're running the risk of diabetes, it's better to stop doing the things that are putting you at risk earlier than to keep going and have a bigger problem later. I never really thought of it that way, but that's
I think there is something to be said for that.
Could I change the topic slightly and going back to men, but this doesn't just affect men as well as it affects women as well, and that is the statistic that we were talking about earlier about the prevalence of depression in people in the army or people in the armed forces, specifically the army. And I was struck very profoundly by the fact that both for men and women serving in the army, it was just the army I read about, the prevalence of depression is double what it is in the civilian population. And two things occurred to me when reading that, which I'd like your opinion on. One is, obviously being in the army can be, at its extreme, an incredibly stressful occupation, and therefore one might expect there to be some vulnerabilities to mental illness.
You are going to expose yourself to trauma that is way beyond the normal spectrum of trauma that most of us would experience. And the rate of PTSD in our war veterans, of course, is pretty high.
Which is not surprising given the level of...
Yeah. Well, if you do actually serve and you see atrocities and you narrowly escape with your life, and you're left with survivor guilt and all those sorts of things again, that is hugely associated with depression. In fact, I used to work in a clinic which was a complex depression, anxiety and trauma clinic, and most of the men that I saw there, and it was predominantly men who'd been in war-torn situations, some armies, some civilians, and they nearly all had quite severe depression. And I think that the longer that PTSD goes untreated, the more likely you are to then develop depression.
It's not surprising. And is it even worse for a soldier to admit to mental frailty? Because you're a soldier, you're a fighter, you're the epitome of manhood in many ways. Did you find these guys struggling with that?
I suspect that's the case. I mean, that when you talk, you probably are self-selecting for that kind of guy. Although the environment is definitely going to be encouraging male stereotypes of being in control, reining in your emotions, and getting on with the job and being strong. You
really do feel for these guys, don't you?
Well, I mean, you can understand that is the approach the army takes, because I suppose in the heat of battle, other men's welfare depends on you keeping your shit together.
But you do fear for these young guys who want action, they want adventure, and you fear if they're not educated in what risk it's putting them in. Not physical risk, mental risk, which is sometimes even more.
You would hope that there would be a good systematic screening for conditions that might predispose you to PTSD, like a pre-existing kind of anxiety disorder, or having experienced some trauma in your early life, which might make you more likely to suffer. So that's an area to look at. But also, I wonder if there's more that can be done with people in the theatre of war. I met a guy at a party, he was quite high up in the army, telling me about how infantrymen had responded better to a trauma. So, for example, your fellow combat soldier gets blown up by a landmine next to you. They should actually be conveyed to barracks with the rest of the men, rather than taken to a hospital to see the psychiatrist, take time out, and so on. He thought that it was probably more therapeutic for them to be back in with the lads, as it were, and talking about it.
Is that for two things? Is that one, to get back to normality as quickly as possible, rather than to make it be a therapeutic event, and also actually because his comrades are better at giving them official therapy?
I think more that. Yeah.
Do we have a summary? I mean, I think the most important thing for me, and then you can summarize properly. To me, the thing that's screaming out from this is the thing that we always say. If you're suffering, or even if you can relate to some of the things that we say in terms of symptoms, the worst thing to do is nothing about it.
Or if you know a guy who is getting a bit more irritable than usual, it's worth talking to him about other symptoms of depression.
I'm in pain. I don't know why. It doesn't seem to leave me. I'm exhausted because I can't sleep. I'm so pissed off with it. It can come out in aggression.
I think because you've held on to it for so long, and you've told yourself you should be in control, and you're not in control anymore.
And you're a man, and you've got to be in control, and that's what men do. And so, listen, boys, you've learnt to inspect your testicles. If you can inspect your testicles, and if you're over 50, if you don't mind a doctor inspecting your arsehole, inspect your brains. They're even more important.
Indeed. On that note, we'll bid you adieu. Hey, thanks for joining us on Why the Long Face. As ever, we're here to inform, hopefully, and entertain, but we're not here to give you medical advice. There is, however, information on our website, ytlf.com, that's whytlf.com, about where to get help. See you next time.